What is up, my brothers and sisters? This is Banter City, and today we're gonna talk about this book which I've just finished reading. When I say just, it was finished a couple of days ago. The name of the book is Islam and the Future of Tolerance. This book is basically a conversation between neuroscientist Sam Harris and Maajid Nawaz, who runs a reform movement named Quilliam, which are aimed at deprogramming people. It's basically aimed at preventing people from having extremist mindsets, conservative mindsets, and creating cults and joining cults that lead to extremism. So it's basically taking people, making it's aimed at making religious people, especially Islam, the people of Islam, much more secular and liberal. Okay, why is Majid doing this? Because he's got a story. So the book begins with a recount of Majid's backstory, wherein Majid was part of a cult when he was a teenager, and this was fueled by a variety of factors that led to him joining a cult and then recruiting followers for that extremist Islamist cult. Although him, and then they going to different African countries, and basically what they were doing is adding up more and more followers under very conservative doctrines, and in the end doing activities like forced conversions. So they were doing a lot of crazy things which are not considered as legal and stuff like that. And in the end, Majid gets imprisoned, and that's when he has the epiphany, and that's where he turns around and looks at what he's done. And also, we come to know that Majid has lost his wife and son in this as a result of extremism. I mean, we don't get the details of it, but that's a big loss for him. So basically, the purpose of this book was to, usually whenever someone talks about Islam, there's a lot of buzz stating that he is an Islamophobe or something like that. So the conversation always gets stifled, it always gets pressed down. Nobody really discusses about it. So because of this, ill interpretations, misinterpretations, and all such things start to stem up, and we all are aware of this movie. My name is Khan, and I'm not a terrorist. And yes, I mean, definitely not all Muslims are terrorists, and that is what this book tries to establish. And it is basically, it's kind of like an antidote to terrorism and extremism. And while this book does not entirely accomplish its motive, of course, it's impossible to accomplish its motive in a small book like this, especially in a conversation, but it gives rays of hope to anyone who reads it, that not just that you and I can also be take part in Majid's vision of future in the Islamic world. So initially, Sam and Majid have some disagreements based on interpretation. Sam gives a very extremist interpretation and states that the Quran is a violent scripture, and simply reading it would lead to misbehavior, unlawful behavior, cruel behavior, and medieval mentalities. And then they go on about talking about defining different terms like jihadism, Islamism, we all know what jihadism is. It's basically what the people of ISIS do. They kill the infidels and other people, and then we have Islamism, which has been defined as people who would ideologically support ISIS, but these people don't get their hands dirty. These people just, although they want Islam to reign over the world, they don't personally go in and do the work. And then we have conservative Muslims, which is 80% of the population, and then we have liberal Muslims, which is some 10% of the population. So this 10% jihadists and Islamists are the ones that are changing the entire uh, religion of Islam and have created a reputation for it with regards, which is kind of aligned with terrorist allegiances. But we all know, I mean, I have friends who are very good, who are Muslim and very good, although they do face some kind of restrictions within the society. So we'll talk about all these different things and much more. Sam gives a concentric circle analogy, which helps us understand this better. At the center, there's jihadism, and there's Islamism, and there's conservatives who occupy 80% of the spectrum, and then there's liberal Muslims, 10%. So, the difference between conservatives and the Islamists is that they don't have they don't share the same beliefs with respect to violent attacks on infidels and other people. They are much more tolerant than Islamists. The only thing that the conservatives are very much keen on is things like human rights and all these things, and women rights especially. It's something conservatives would rarely agree on with any other person on earth, because we all know that religious doctrines, not just Islam but even others, have their religious laws bias towards men, and women are considered as the inferior species. Okay, I'm not a feminist, so I'm not gonna waste too much time on this. Next, we have liberal Muslims, which we all know these are people who happen to be Muslims because of by virtue of being born in Muslim families, and they do celebrate their festivals, but they're not deeply bound to it. And these are people who advocate for secular values and basic human rights, right to speech, and everything. Normally, if you're a conservatist and if you talk to your parents about the existence of God and other things, you cannot say that I don't think I agree with this one. You're gonna get a violent reaction back from your neighbors and your relatives. But liberals, liberal families allow you to talk about all such things in in an easier way. So the first half of this book is spent in distinguishing between these different paradigms, and then Maajid outlines how the extremist organizations and Islamists recruit people into their group or cult, or into their ambit. So first they'll provide a grievance narrative, and then they have a charismatic recruiter, and then they use your identity crisis to provide you a different identity, and then they'll provide your ideological dogma, and then that would be kind of like a solution which you will buy and you're in. So it really, Majid Nawaz really gets into it because he has been there and he's done all the dirty things, but now he wants change, and he wants the world to change for the better. And Sam points out that even though you want to change the world for better, we have this book called Quran, which is filled with a lot of verses which are very much controversial with regards to tolerance and peace. What about that? Majid responds that a text does not have a single interpretation, it depends on any person who interprets. So, this is what he calls pluralism. So when he advocates pluralism, what happens is that no single interpretation is considered as the final authority. All interpretations are equally correct. Of course, there are interpretations which are much closer to what the text implies, but again, we all will have different opinions. So, Maajid advocates pluralism, and he says pluralism will turn into secularism, which will pave the room for humanist and liberal values, which is basically the goal. And he says that most of the conservatives, although they are against Islamists, but whenever we broach this topic, end up unconsciously sliding towards the support of jihadists and Islamists. It happens in such a way that nobody notices. So he asks the conservatives to align with liberals and fight Islamists and jihadists. And then he goes on about some political issues like 9/11 and and Saddam Hussein, who was the leader of Al Qaeda. Now, this is a very important distinction. Maajid goes on to say that when US killed Saddam Hussein, Al Qaeda was defeated, but that was not the end of it. This is not just any other criminal gang which you're hitting at. This is an ideological cult. This is an extremist cult. So, Obama's government, Obama's general's army, the US Army handled Al Qaeda like any other cult. So they killed the leader, but that was not the end of it. Then came ISIS, much more dangerous and much more fierce. And these people went on to kill so many people, and they are doing so much atrocity in the Middle East. Had the US government, Obama's government, that is, have seen deeper into the ideological split between different people and attempted to disband it from a much more subtle perspective, like Majid aims to do, things would have been much better. But they only killed Saddam Hussein, and they did not care. They wanted to be politically correct, and their political correctness led them to what we see today, ISIS. And Majid goes on to say the term Islamophobia is a misnomer that's used by apologetics, and people who vouch for Islam, but unfortunately they end up vouching for Islamism and jihadism, which are not the kind of Islam majority on earth follow. So, in the end, this book is all about advocating human rights and a secular form of governance, a secular public policy. And this does not mean that you have to denounce your religion. Religion, God, all these things can still be followed, but we need to give credence to all the 21st century values. No human should be oppressed, and at the same time, we should try not to slip into extremism and medieval mentality. So, yes, if you're a religious person, if you are a spiritual person, if you're into politics, if you are a Muslim, you should read this book and talk to your friends about it, because this is an important conversation we all must have. Thank you for listening.